Chapter 2. The World Before the Scrolls, a Kingdom Waiting for Deliverance. Long before a shepherd stumbled upon forgotten jars in the caves overlooking the Dead Sea, another story had been unfolding for centuries. It was a story of conquest, exile, restoration, rebellion, and hope. To understand why the Dead Sea Scrolls were written, one must first understand the world that produced them. They were not created in isolation. They emerged from a society wrestling with one overwhelming question. How could God's chosen people remain faithful while living under the rule of foreign empires? The answer was not obvious, and different groups reached very different conclusions. The story begins with one of the greatest catastrophes in Jewish history. In 586 BCE, the armies of King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon captured Jerusalem after a prolonged siege. The magnificent First Temple, built by Solomon centuries earlier, was reduced to rubble. Much of the population was deported to Babylon, and the Kingdom of Judah ceased to exist as an independent nation. For the Israelites, this was more than a military defeat. The temple had been regarded as the earthly dwelling place of God. Its destruction raised profound theological questions. Had God abandoned his people? Had his promises failed? Or had the nation brought judgment upon itself through disobedience? The prophets offered an explanation. They argued that the catastrophe was not evidence of God's weakness but of his justice. Israel's repeated violations of the covenant had invited divine judgment. Yet these same prophets also proclaimed hope. The exile would not last forever. One day, God would restore his people. That hope appeared to be fulfilled when the Persian king Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 BCE. Unlike many conquerors, Cyrus permitted displaced peoples to return to their ancestral lands and rebuild their sanctuaries. Jewish exiles returned to Jerusalem and completed the Second Temple around 516 BCE. The restoration was remarkable, but it fell short of expectations. The temple stood once again, yet the kingdom of David was not restored. No descendant of David ruled as king. Judah remained a small province within a vast foreign empire. Many prophetic promises appeared only partially fulfilled. This gap between expectation and reality became one of the defining features of Jewish thought during the Second Temple period. For nearly 4 centuries, the Jewish people lived under successive empires. First came the Persians. Then, in 332 BCE, Alexander the Great swept across the Near East with astonishing speed. Within a decade, the Persian Empire had collapsed, and Greek culture spread from Egypt to India. Alexander died unexpectedly at the age of 32, leaving no stable succession. His generals divided the empire among themselves, and Judea found itself caught between rival Hellenistic kingdoms. Greek influence transformed daily life. Cities adopted Greek architecture, philosophy, literature, athletics, and language. Wealthy Jews increasingly embraced Hellenistic customs, while others regarded these changes as dangerous compromises with pagan culture. This tension reached a breaking point during the reign of the Seleucid king Antiochus for Epiphanes. According to ancient Jewish sources, Antiochus attempted to suppress traditional Jewish religious practices. Circumcision was prohibited. Observance of the Sabbath became punishable. The temple itself was rededicated to Zeus, and pagan sacrifices were reportedly offered within its courts. Whether every detail recorded in later Jewish texts occurred exactly as described remains debated. Some historians argue that political rebellion played as large a role as religious persecution. Others believe later accounts emphasized religious oppression to explain the uprising that followed. Regardless of the precise sequence of events, the result was explosive. Around 167 BCE, the priest Mattathias and his sons launched a revolt against Seleucid rule. His son, Judas Maccabeus, became the movement's greatest military commander. Against overwhelming odds, the rebels recaptured Jerusalem and purified the temple. This victory is still commemorated through the festival of Hanukkah. For many Jews, the Maccabean revolt seemed to confirm that faithfulness to God could overcome even the mightiest empire. Yet victory introduced new complications. The Hasmonean dynasty, founded by the Maccabees, combined political leadership with the high priesthood. Some welcomed this arrangement, but others questioned its legitimacy. The Hasmoneans descended from a priestly family, not from the royal line of David. Critics accused later Hasmonean rulers of corruption, political ambition, and excessive accommodation to foreign customs. The unity forged during the revolt gradually dissolved. Instead of one Jewish movement, several distinct groups emerged, each claiming to represent authentic faithfulness. The Pharisees emphasized careful interpretation of both written and oral law. They believed that divine revelation extended beyond Scripture through traditions passed down by respected teachers. Their interpretations profoundly influenced later rabbinic Judaism. The Sadducees were associated primarily with the temple priesthood and aristocratic families. They accepted the written Torah as authoritative but rejected many oral traditions embraced by the Pharisees. Ancient sources portray them as politically influential and closely connected with temple administration. A third group, traditionally identified as the Essenes, withdrew from what they considered a corrupt religious establishment. They practiced communal living, strict purity regulations, shared property, disciplined initiation procedures, and intense study of Scripture. Many scholars associate this movement with the community behind at least some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Other groups also existed. Some became militant revolutionaries willing to wage war against Rome. Others sought spiritual renewal through prophetic movements. Many ordinary Jews belonged to no organized faction at all. The diversity revealed by the Dead Sea Scrolls confirms that Judaism during this period was anything but uniform. One belief united many of these otherwise competing groups. History was approaching a decisive turning point. Foreign domination could not last forever. God would intervene. Evil would be judged. Israel would be vindicated. A righteous king or priest, or perhaps both, would appear. The dead might be raised. Nations would be judged. A new age of justice would begin. These expectations varied considerably. Some anticipated a single royal Messiah descended from David. Others expected two Messiahs, one kingly and one priestly. Still others focused less on individual leaders and more on God's direct intervention through angels, heavenly armies, or cosmic judgment. The Dead Sea Scrolls preserve many of these hopes. Unlike later religious traditions that often present a unified theology, the scrolls reveal vigorous debate. Their authors frequently interpreted the same biblical passages in dramatically different ways. They searched ancient prophecies for clues about current events, convinced that they were living in the final generation before God's intervention. This atmosphere helps explain why the scrolls often sound urgent. Their authors did not believe they were merely preserving ancient traditions. They believed they were preparing for history's climax. Yet one feature of this world is often overlooked. Although later readers frequently imagine ancient Judaism as centered solely on the temple, many Jewish communities had already developed alternative forms of worship and study. Synagogues appeared in various regions. Teachers interpreted Scripture outside Jerusalem. Communities developed distinctive customs while still acknowledging the temple's importance. The religious landscape was therefore decentralized long before the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. This diversity is precisely what the Dead Sea Scrolls illuminate. They preserve voices that later disappeared from history. Some movements evolved into rabbinic Judaism. Some influenced early Christianity. Others vanished entirely after the Roman wars. Without the scrolls, historians would know little about many of these forgotten communities. The manuscripts therefore function not simply as ancient books but as echoes of conversations that once shaped the future of two of the world's largest religions. The traditional picture of Second Temple Judaism as sharply divided into clearly defined sects has become less certain in recent decades. Earlier scholars often described the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes as organized institutions with well-defined memberships. More recent research suggests that these labels, largely preserved by historians such as Josephus, may oversimplify a much more fluid reality. Individuals may have moved between different circles of influence, and local communities may not have fit neatly into any single category. Another debate concerns the extent of Hellenistic influence. Older scholarship frequently portrayed Greek culture as a corrupting force resisted by faithful Jews. Contemporary historians argue that the relationship was more complex. Many observant Jews adopted Greek language, education, and administrative practices while remaining deeply committed to Jewish law. Rather than viewing Hellenism and Judaism as opposites, they see continuous interaction and adaptation. Finally, the common portrayal of this era as one of universal expectation for a coming Messiah may overstate the evidence. While many texts express messianic hope, others focus primarily on faithful obedience, priestly leadership, or divine intervention without expecting a single messianic figure. The Dead Sea Scrolls themselves preserve multiple and sometimes conflicting visions of the future, suggesting that Jewish expectations before the 1st century were far more diverse than later traditions often imply. The stage was now set. Into this fractured world, a secluded community settled along the barren shores of the Dead Sea, convinced that the rest of Israel had lost its way. They believed they alone possessed the true interpretation of God's covenant, and they committed that conviction to writing. Their settlement would become known as Qumran. In its caves, their words would sleep for nearly 2,000 years.